Hello and welcome to the Saturday Debrief. I am Lewis Aaron and I am joined by the lovely Callum and Sarah. How are we doing?
Yes,
Hi,
good,
I'm all
thank
right. How are you?
you.
Yeah, I'm not bad, not bad. I am very much struggling to keep up with the news cycle this week. It is insane. I've challenged myself with trying to keep up with like all the live updates from like multiple US outlets of everything that's happening in the US, everything that's happening in the Middle East and the UK. So my brain is just overloaded. There is just so much going on. How about you guys?
Yeah, I think probably the same to be fair, but I feel like this week went really quickly and we're finally in February. So January dragged, February's
It,
now
time
here.
time's definitely gone by fast, hasn't it? I'm not sure why. It's just been one of those months. It's January is normally quite a long month, and the fact that we're into February already is quite scary. But yeah, as for news cycle, I feel like you say that every time, Lewis.
I
You
do.
like you like there's so
Lewis
much
does
going on in
say
the
that
news
every
cycle right
time.
now.
I'm such a cliche, I know. Obviously, hello to everyone in the audience. Yes, we're late again. Yes, it's my fault. I will take the blame. Uh, I think somebody put in the comments earlier that it must be Lewis, definitely Lewis hosting tonight because they're late. Yes, yes, you clocked me very well. But I do want to jump onto the first story, which is Grenfell Tower. So I'm sure everybody has seen this week that Grenfell Tower is getting demolished. It's going to be demolished after the 8th-year anniversary, but it's obviously led to a lot of controversy. So Angela Rayner released this through a press release, which got her a little bit of stick because people were saying that she should have made a press conference and an announcement, and people are saying that she avoided the press conference to avoid any scrutiny. Also, it was reported that during the meeting, when she was consulting the victims and victims' families of Grenfell Tower, that she actually had to leave the meeting and be escorted out by security because people were so upset. Apparently, there were gasps, there were shouting, and then she had to be escorted out. So, obviously, just to remember, 72 people died in the Grenfell Tower. Obviously, it still stands today. It's wrapped up with a sign in memorial of Grenfell Tower, and residents are annoyed. They think it should stay as a memorial, or some part of it should stay as a memorial. Now, they've said that there is going to be a memorial built with the whatever's going to replace it there. There's going to be some form of memorial. They've said that it's going to be a slow demolition over 2 years to respect the site. It's not going to be a quick knockdown. But part of obviously the wider controversy is that it was only last year that the police have announced that they obviously are investigating people who are related to obviously the construction and the failures of the companies, any officials, but they won't be expected to release any charges or potential charges or report until 2026. So this story has stirred up a lot of controversy over the week. What are your guys' thoughts on it so far?
Well, it's incredibly emotive. Like I remember when this had happened, I was now I'm casting my mind back. I was in sixth form at the time, and I remember crying when it had happened because I knew how devastating this would be for those in the area, a very incredibly rich borough, and then you've got the rubbish cladding that was on that building just because they wanted it to look nice. So I think that the victims' families have every right to criticise this decision. It's I think, a deeply insensitive decision to demolish Grenfell Tower because I don't think accountability has been delivered just yet. There have been so many things that have happened similar to this, or in 2009, not so many, but in 2009 when there was that deadly fire of Le Canal House, a tower block in London, and it actually showed that it had flammable materials that should be banned. But again, the government failed to act. And I'm seeing it again. The government had failed to act, and that's why Grenfell had happened. And then 72 people unfortunately lost their lives. So Grenfell was a disaster waiting to happen, and I don't think that justice has been served for the victims.
And obviously, as well, on top of that, obviously the people who are the direct victims of this are definitely the most important in this story. But in terms of how it's then continued to ruin people's lives for years on afterwards, after they inspected, thousands of buildings, which all have similar issues, which all then need to be replaced and paid for. And
Mm,
people have literally, some people have lost their livelihoods over this. And we are continued to be obviously stained by this disgrace.
mm.
Obviously, we can hope that some charges will be brought to some of these companies. If I remember correctly, some of them are American, so that's obviously going to cause issues. But Cal, what do you think about this as well?
Yeah, sorry, that's my phone pinging. Just to apologise to people, by the way, I think we've got some audio sync issues on the stream today, so apologies for that. Yeah, I'm a little bit unsure about this, because I understand if there's safety concerns about the structure of the building, then knocking it down makes sense for safety. It would be, I would hate to imagine a scenario where the building comes crashing down and more people end up caught up in a second tragedy. But at the same time, it was Vanessa Feltz actually that was talking about this on LBC today, and I was very surprised to sort of hear her suggesting this. But something she suggested was, why didn't they at least announce some form of memorial to replace it before they announced the demolition? Say, okay, we're going to knock it down, but we're going to replace it with a community garden, in memory of the lives lost, or with somewhere for children from the area to play, or we'll put a monument or something there. But the fact that they've just sort of said, yeah, we're knocking it down. And also, Angela Rayner has apparently consulted some of the survivors and the families of those who lost their lives, but many of them don't want it to be knocked down, because to them it is a monument. It's a it's a grave in some instances. It has that sort of, what's the word, that sort of weight to it in the area, and to knock it down for some feels a bit sort of insensitive. But I don't know. I can kind of see both sides. One thing I know for definite is the way that the government have gone about it is clearly not the right way.
And I think for me, like, when I'd heard the news, because I remember sending it to you guys as soon as I'd heard it, and I was just like, is this an attempt to just, like, is this a form of erasure? Let's just ignore our problems and just demolish it, get rid of the things that we need to concern ourselves with. Because if they were actually concerned about public safety, that cladding wouldn't have been done in the first place. But no, they decided to do cheap cladding, and that's why I take heed to the fact that I'm like, okay, so now you concern yourself with public safety, great, amazing, but those 72 lives are going to be gone in vain, because still I don't see that accountability has been mandated in these inquiries. I don't think that people are listening or centering the victims' voices in this. The lived experience of the victims' voices are not being centered in this at all. And I don't think that if you to ask them that they feel that justice has been served. So to me, yeah, it feels like erasure of an issue.
And on that as well, talking about justice being served, it almost feels like it's not the priority. Like, knocking the building down, fine. If there are structural concerns, like I say, and it needs to go, then maybe that's a conversation that needs to be had, and it might need to be looked into. But right now, we still haven't got justice. We still haven't got justice for the victims and the survivors, let alone started, actually making any real progress in making sure that the many, many, many other tower blocks up and down the UK that are also fitted with this cladding, have that cladding removed and replaced with something that's not flammable. And while people are still living in buildings that are very dangerous, and where we could see a repeat of this again, it seems a little bit just like, it's not really the priority. Like, why are they making a thing now about, well, we're gonna demolish the building, when they still haven't bothered to make sure all the other buildings are safe?
I think as well, obviously, we've to go back to the Tories as well, like obviously austerity, all that type of stuff. We understand how services in terms of like police investigating things can be, slowed down due to just not having the resources. But my issue is that even in times of where we have had resources, when we've done inquiries, it all just seems too slow, and it is the same story over and over and over again. I think back to COVID, right? We obviously haven't even reached the halfway point of our COVID inquiry. However, I think it was like Sweden, yeah, smaller country, I get it, but they still managed to get this done within a few months, right? It just doesn't make sense. Even in the US as well, yes, they're a very rich country, but when they do their investigations through committees and stuff like that, some of them can take months. Yeah, some of them can take 1 or 2 years. But this idea of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year inquiries and finding justice maybe 15 to 20 years later, it's just disgusting. I don't understand how, when you're throwing hundreds of millions of pounds at inquiries, and sometimes even more, how we don't get results quicker and we don't get information quicker. I get through the process. They'll do like we're halfway through. Here's some of the things that we found so far. That's great. But the actual speed of all of these things, it is pretty disgusting. And of course, as well, to further complicate it, in terms of the American companies who were complicit in this, according to the report, even when it comes to this, we may be trying to extradite people, which could take years. We recently had that case where that person in the US who was the wife of a diplomat ran over that young boy. I cannot remember his name, and I do apologize. It literally took us years just to get her over here. We could be looking at the current rate of maybe somebody in a courtroom in mid 2030s at this point. Who knows? It's quite disgusting.
Sorry.
I was just going to pose one more question though, just to be more devil's advocate. I think a memorial is a nice idea if Grenfell has to go at some point. When is the appropriate time to, knock down Grenfell? Is it only after we've got justice? Is it after the entire issue itself is sorted out in terms of cladding? Like, when is the appropriate time?
It's a good question. I was thinking about this today, actually, on the train back. I was like, when would a good time be to do this? I think it's when justice is served and when accountability is mandated. There is still a failure at the moment. The response to it, like you said, is slow. There's failure to fix fire safety in other buildings, because after Grenfell, thousands of buildings are found to have similar dangerous cladding, and the government have promised to remove it, but progress has been slow and, in their eyes, costly. So as of 2025, there are many buildings that still have very, very unsafe cladding, putting so many lives at risk. I don't see an appropriate response having been done just yet, when there are still problems to fix. I'm like, well, actually, have you learnt from the issue, or is this just deniability? Like, I don't want to address the issue, so therefore we're just going to demolish it. And that's what I'm taking issue with. And then I can't help but think that actually they are shying away from actually confronting the uncomfortable truths, that I genuinely think that this is a class issue from start to finish. The disaster literally exposed how the UK government and private companies systemically devalue working class lives. Many of the people who are in social housing in that building and in social housing as a whole do come from ethnic minorities and working class backgrounds. So I think they fail to see how class actually plays a role in all of this as well. So do they just devalue working class lives? I want to see a huge shift. I want to see this actually be mandated in these inquiries, this actually be told explicitly in black and white. And then actually I might see that we might be moving in a progressive way, but at the moment it's not progressive at all.
There's definitely a sense of that, out of sight, out of mind, isn't there, about this?
I just wanted to mention Aidan's comment. So they've said in terms of 2 years, they wanted to do it sensitively, meaning, when buildings get demolished and sites get cleared, it can be done quite quickly. But they're trying to, as they've said, be sensitive and doing a slow demolition, as opposed to whatever other form of demolition would have happened in another circumstance. So yeah, obviously some private company is probably going to be making money off of this slow demolition. But they're trying to do it sensitively, according to them, anyway. But yeah, so again, with the timeline, it's disgusting. I understand it is a sensitive topic. At some point in the future, somebody is going to have to take this hit. At some point, it would have to come down, and somebody would have to be that person who is in Angela Rayner's place and take that hit and take the public scrutiny. But obviously, it's just 8 years. It doesn't really feel like it's still the appropriate time, especially with the absolute lack of justice.
Exactly.
Becca makes a good point as well. She just said, the waste will need to be removed. The area will have loads of toxins and chemicals because of the fire. And that's the other thing. It's not going to be as easy as sort of demolishing a building. Like, there's all the effects, or all the toxins caused by the fire that will still be in the building, that when you demolish it, that's going to pollute the area around it. So it'll need a proper cleanup job going on. It's not just going to be a straightforward demolition. And what effect is that going to have on the community as well?
Yeah, of course. Obviously, either way, even if they're doing a sensitive removal or demolition, it's still obviously going to be disturbing for the community. They're going to have to watch that for 2 years as it happens. And the one thing that I actually couldn't necessarily find is, like, what are they replacing it with? Besides the memorial? They said they want to do a memorial and they're going to discuss that with the community. But what's going to replace it? Are they just putting another development there? I actually didn't find that information specifically.
I'm not sure.
I
Sarah,
can
have you
answer
seen
that.
anything?
Did
No,
if anybody in the audience saw anything? Because I read a few articles about this before, and it was all focused on the controversy of Grenfell, but I actually couldn't find anything. I probably should have read the press release, perhaps from Angela Rayner's office, but I didn't. So if anybody knows in the comments exactly what they're planning to do with the site, let us know. Or is it just going to be under consultation? And obviously, then the people who end up living in a new development there in the future are going to have to deal with the fact that they are on a memorial site too.
It just says replaced by a memorial, but like I said earlier, they've not given any indication of what that memorial could be, and what they could have said is let's put a memorial garden there or whatever. Talk to the families of the victims, come up with that, and then once that was decided on, then announce the demolition and move to it. Because at the moment, it's okay. Well, there's a memorial, but what's that going to look like? And it wouldn't surprise me. I hope this isn't the case, but it wouldn't surprise me if, when it finally is all gone, they've not decided what memorial is going to take its place, and it just sits as an empty site for a bit. Because with the way that things, like this tends to go, it just wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
So,
the voices
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I actually cut you off.
No, go ahead. I was going to change the topic, but you.
No, it's fine. I think yeah. Just to go off what Cal was saying, just they are completely decentering the voices of those that have this lived experience, and I think that their voices need to be at the forefront. And unfortunately, their voices are still not at the forefront. So I think it's just an insult, to be honest. And I hope for better in the future. And something like this does not happen ever again. So yeah.
Let's hope not. We've still got many buildings out there that still have the cladding. I am going to move on to Elon Musk, Doge, and the Trump administration. We do have a few videos that we are going to be watching in a couple of minutes that are related to different things that have been happening over in the US. But I want to specifically focus on Musk and Doge. I'm sure everybody's obviously seen the stories about his team going to all these different buildings and departments. So far, he's had access to about 17. Some of them have been blocked by various judges, but it still seems that they are still interfering. We're entering into a phase where judges' orders may just be ignored potentially. Obviously, they stopped an injunction on US aid and certain parts of it, but just yesterday there was a video, which I don't have, I'm just making a reference to it, where a guy was literally taking off the sign of the US aid building. So it seems like they are ignoring orders. What's more important about this story is, in terms of the US Constitution, we all know, if you follow US politics and US history, is that Congress controls the purse, meaning that they fund the departments. Also, when it comes to a federal agency, it has to be created by Congress, funded by Congress, and its policy can be dictated by Congress. There's some overlap in power and who dictates what. Obviously, the Trump administration and whoever's president can appoint people who are in charge of administrations and staff them, and there's a lot of overlap there, but ultimately, Congress controls the purse. So what is obviously happening right now is that Musk is going into these buildings and Trump's signing executive orders, and they're just firing staff who've already had money allocated to them for spending in the past years. It's not just legislation and money that was spent last year. It's from years ago too, money that's been promised and dedicated to certain projects, whether it's domestic or abroad. And they're just going in these buildings, firing people and blocking them. Now, if we can go to the video of the Congress people trying to get into the Department of Education just yesterday, it's quite a scary sight. They haven't... What was that?
Sorry, have we got this? Is this the one that we've got, or is this one you?
Yeah, it's on the other tab. We need to go to the reaction side, don't we?
Yeah, but I've got the video that we've got is actually it's Trump signing an executive order. Is the one we can come back to it.
Yeah, I did upload those two videos. See if you can.
Yeah, I've got it here.
You've got it. Okay. Just a moment.
Here we go.
And don't lock the door. We're coming in. Who are you?
You're not coming in.
Who are you?
Who are you?
So, sorry, just to clarify, so this is a bunch of Congress people trying to get into the Department of Education. They've turned up and they're trying to access an entryway, which is normally open to officials and people who just want to go into the building for appointments, and they have blocked it. It's quite a scary scene.
Who are you?
Who are you, sir? Do you have business here?
Yes.
I have sent the secretary, I have sent the assistant secretary a letter alerting her that we would be here today, and we've asked her for a meeting.
Yeah, I don't know that that's been accepted, so until that's accepted.
Wait a minute,
Who are you?
Can you see this?
And what do you do here?
What do you do
I
here?
have security responsibility.
Get out of the way. We pay for your job. We pay you.
We're members of
We pay
Congress.
you.
We're not
We're members of Congress.
Nobody has accepted a meeting.
members of Congress.
You
Wait a
are.
minute, we haven't heard that from the secretary. We haven't heard that from the spokesman.
I'm relaying that.
You are not the spokesman for the department. You are a security guard.
Can you identify?
I already did.
What's more weird about this as well? Like looking at the video, like he just looks like a civilian. Like who is this guy?
It's giving. I remember back in high school, I was a prefect in the performing arts block, and we would literally be stood there manning the doors, and we'd have a list of who had a room book that was allowed in at lunchtime and who wasn't. And it's literally giving that same energy. And I can tell you right now, although I wouldn't have admitted it at the time, if somebody came in that I didn't like, but I knew that they were supposed to be in, me and the rest of them, we absolutely would do exactly what they're doing. It's childhood behavior. It's literally the behaving like teenagers, like, well, I hold the keys and you're not coming in. You know, it's literally what me and the prefects were doing when we were like 13 because we didn't like the people that wanted to come through the door. It's high school stuff. Like we shouldn't be seeing this in official government departments.
Yeah.
You know, at the top of the US government. It's insane.
But just to emphasize as well, obviously, you know, just to reiterate how governments are supposed to work, especially in the US, is that, you know, Congress passes a bill and then it goes, the House passes a bill or the Senate, and then it goes to each other's house. They have to obviously vote on it. Then it goes to the president for signing. And that could be funding, it could be policy, and it could be a mixture of things. You cannot just get rid of a department through executive order. The president clearly in the Constitution does not have this power, yet he is blocking the people who hold the purse to that department, who have the power of that department, arguably way more power than the president does, denying them entry by directing, because behind that door, you will see in a second, are armed members of the Homeland Security, also another layer of protection from preventing literal elected Congress people from getting into the department when they've actually notified the department that they were actually coming. It's very scary. It really is.
Where's your badge? Where's your badge?
You don't have any identification.
Where's your ID? Where's your ID?
We are not.
It's not good enough.
We are not.
They want to close the Department of Education. They want to cut back on funding for low-income areas through Title I. They want to eliminate Head Start. They want to cut back on school lunches, cut back on access to college. And we're going to make sure that they recognize that that has to go through Congress and through our committee. And if we can get 3 Republicans to join us on the committee, we can stop everything they want to do. And if it gets out of committee, we need 3 Republicans in the United States to join us to block what they want to do in abolishing the Department of Education.
President Donald Trump has promised to abolish the Department of Education, and he believes that he can do this through executive.
Sorry to pause. I don't understand, and I don't know if you can explain this, Lewis. I don't understand where this desire to close the Department of Education has come from. What's the reason for that?
That's a good question.
Sure. So in terms of the way the education system works generally in America, I have some knowledge, but not like an in-depth. So if anybody wants to either add or correct anything I say in the comments, please feel free to do so. But states essentially control their own education systems. However, the Department of Education at the federal level will obviously firstly help with policies. It also is funded to distribute money to lots of different programs around the country. So for example, a state might pay for its school and pay for its teachers and pay for those facilities, but a federal funded program through the government might pay for those kids free meals. It might pay for some extra technology to upgrade the schools. It might pay for loads of things. Hundreds of billions of dollars is essentially funneled through the federal Department of Education to fund extra things on top of what the state pays for across all these different schools all across the US. It also handles like scholarships and grants at the college level. It also handles, everything from like when COVID happened and they were trying to funnel money to the Department of Education so people could get like, mental health care and helping people get back into school. It funds just basically lots and lots of programs and scholarships. It doesn't necessarily control the curriculum, but it can help work with the curriculum. So essentially they're just trying to get rid of that essentially.
Trump's presumably saying that investing in youngsters in the education system is a waste of money. I mean, is that? Yeah, I'm just trying because a lot of the executive orders that Trump has signed, I don't like them. They're authoritarian. They're bordering on fascist. A lot of them, but I get his sort of like where he's coming from. I just don't understand this one.
It doesn't make sense, and also it's going to completely marginalize student populations or vulnerable student populations. Like I see this divide becoming so evident. I mean, it's already evident as is, but it's going to be even more poignant now than it is than it's ever been. It's a complete authoritarian move, and I would agree. I think it's venturing into fascism.
We don't have to finish the rest of the video, so I'm going to put us back onto the other screen if you can, Callum. So just to kind of round off an extra few things that's happening with this story. Just a few days ago, this didn't, again, get reported on much because there is so much happening, but there is another organization kind of similar to the Heritage Foundation who wrote Project 2025, and now we're seeing those policies going in, and that's a whole other story. But there's another organization which is linked and has been funded and worked with Project 2025. I cannot remember their name, but essentially what they're doing is, because of Trump's attack on DEI, which he's using as a weapon to do all these types of things that he's doing, they have been releasing names of people who work in diversity roles all across the government. And the other day, they released a list of people who worked for the health department, and their job title was like working in health equity. And health equity is, for example, if you're poor, right, and you need extra help with your cancer treatments because you're poor. If you're a black person suffering from diseases, like we know that the mortality rate for women when they're in childbirth is like 4 times higher, and stuff like that. So it's like kind of working on like these specific health issues where there is equity needed. And most of these women because it was mostly women who worked in these roles, were mostly black women as well. They released their names on the internet. They released their names, they released their pictures and their information, and they put it out onto the internet. And this is where we're at now. It was literally a hit list, essentially. They weren't calling for, obviously, any harm to be done to them, but they are inadvertently, because they don't need to put their names out there. If you want to advocate for something, advocate for it. But they essentially put a hit list out of people with the name equity in their title. And most of these people were black women who worked in these roles because they're passionate about these topics. It's insane and dangerous.
The whole thing's about this, and I've just had a quick look, and I'm just reading on it's theconversation.com. So I mean, it's not a source I've heard of before, but it lists some reasons why Trump wants to close the Department for Education, and it's one of them is the Education Department's alleged woke mentality. There we go. DEI, as you talk about, Lewis, is at the centre of this by what it's looking at here. He also apparently wants to stop America's Marxist indoctrination within education. And there's also something in there about school choice and parental rights, which feeds back to parents' rights around trans children and whether or not children can identify as their actual gender identity, or whether they're going to be forced not to, as well as some red tape. It all seems to link back into Project 2025 that Trump claims he isn't part of.
But where I as well, stir this conversation slightly, because obviously the Department of Education is very important, but the reason why I wanted to talk about this topic in general is because it's pushing the boundaries of the Constitution, because a president cannot shut down a federal agency. That has to be done by Congress. When Congress approves funds for something, it's money spent, and that money should be going towards the things that they've already been legislated for. He does not have this power, and obviously lots of judges have already done lots of injunctions, and some of them have made some very interesting speeches, basically saying how not just unconstitutional it is, but how much of a essential threat and how dangerous these types of moves are. Obviously, it's great that we have these judges in place who are stopping some of these things, and one of them actually was a Trump-appointed judge, ironically. So I'd love to see him being accused of being a woke Marxist judge when it's you appointed him in 2019. But again, what is scary is that when they control, obviously, the House, they control the Senate, and obviously they have 6 Supreme Court justices out of 9. Are they just going to start now making moves to maybe perhaps get rid of these judges? They already seem to be kind of, but not fully, ignoring some of their orders. How far is Trump going to push the Constitution? But more importantly, and this is kind of the important point, is that he can try and push the Constitution, but there's supposed to be systems in place which are supposed to restrain him. And those main systems of function is Congress. But if he has Congress and they're doing things like, threatening people to be primaried, meaning that they will run another person against them to replace them and put tens of millions of dollars behind them, we're moving into a kind of tyrannical kind of phase. And that's what's most scary, because the people who are supposed to be doing their jobs aren't.
And I think removing any sort of like federal oversight would obviously lead to complete corruption and inequality. And I think if you're trying to get rid of this woke agenda or this indoctrination that he feels is happening, this radical indoctrination, like if the government starts to decide what history can be taught or what should be taught in schools, and that's authoritarianism in its finest. And is this now us venturing into some sort of like anti-intellectualism movement? So I'm slightly concerned about where does this end, but also, like you said, this is now a step towards educational inequality. So with him trying to dismantle the Department of Education, he's actually violating plenty of amendments. Like the 10th Amendment literally does give the state power over education, but the federal government has a role in ensuring equal access. He is making it so inequitable if people cannot access education in a way that's fair and right. So again, authoritarianism at its finest, fascism happening right now as we speak in the US, and this like just complete oligarchy. Like I can't believe that we're now, this is what's happening right now in 2025. How is he attempting to exert all of this ridiculous amount of power, and then also fill the brains of people by saying that it's a woke agenda to speak on things that are impacting marginalized communities?
And it's so blatant as well, though. It's not, it's not like some, backhanded, we're going to say one thing out
Yes.
loud and do something behind the scenes. Like he's literally standing on platforms and saying, hey, this is what we're doing.
What's really scary, though, if you've been following the news stories closely, because again, there's just so much coming out, is that what they're doing every day is they're drip feeding things that Musk is apparently finding and his team is finding. And you know what, right? There is government waste. There is always money that the government is spending on stupid crap or, paying too much for something and yada, yada, yada. There are always silly things that you can find. If your government's spending trillions of dollars, there's going to be stuff in there which is stupid. The issue is that the way they're, again, misrepresenting or just misinforming people. So obviously earlier, was it last week, I think, we had they're spending $50 million on condoms for Gaza that Hamas are using for bombs, which again, I know it's so ridiculous and funny, but at the same time, that wasn't true. They were funding condoms to Gaza in Mozambique, and it was just a blatant lie.
Yeah.
More recently this week, we've had Elon Musk going on this tirade where they've discovered that the government have been funding media outlets. They've been funding Politico. They've been funding Bloomberg. And again, it's just a blatant lie. What some media companies do, because my partner actually works for one of these media companies, one you've never heard of, it's a small one, but basically they essentially like private journalism, meaning that they track markets, they track commodities, they it's like a separate service that they offer, sometimes in many ways separate companies who basically do like non-public journalism. And Politico do that. It's called Politico Pro, and people who work in politics buy that. It's kind of like if you are working in finance, you subscribe to a finance magazine. That's essentially what it is for Politico. So the government have been paying for a Politico subscription in different departments to get like non-biased private journalism about like what's going on in government, essentially. What's more interesting is that people like Lauren Boebert, if anybody who knows who she is, she's just one of the really crazy MAGA ladies, the one who famously got caught vaping in a cinema in America. And I'm not even going to go down there. Never mind. She's just accept that she's a crazy one. She went on a massive storm.
All of them, isn't it?
She went on a massive storm about this, saying this is one of the biggest media scandals that has ever happened. Our government have been privately funding left-wing media. Somebody looked into her expenses for her office. Her office pay for this service because loads of people who work in politics pay for private journalism. They pay if you work in markets, anything to do with markets, you pay Bloomberg for its private service, which tracks markets and commodities all around the world. But what I'm building up to here is that they're getting away with this through these lies. And that's what's scary, is that enough people are willing to sit back and allow the government to be dismantled, allow the Trump administration to completely push and just go over the Constitution in many ways because, Hamas are making bombs out of condoms, and people just eat that shit up. And that's what's scary.
Well, this is the thing, like, because it confirms the biases they have of these people that they want to racialize and deem as the other. Like, if anything confirms those biases for them, of course they're going to lap it up. And And I hate to go back to what we were speaking about before, but I just wanted to circle back to something that you'd mentioned, Lewis. But I think it was about Trump and the implications going to have on the education system out there. But this obviously hits very close to home. Education is a right, it's not a privilege, and I think weakening it only serves the rich. It will help to just serve the rich in ways that I don't think they deserve. So I was wondering, do you think that Trump's long-term goal is essentially just to privatize education, making it a privilege instead of a right? Because obviously Trump and his allies, if they do successfully weaken or dismantle the Department of Education, then it could open the door for an end to free public schooling, and then replacing it, and this is me thinking this really long term, but it's replacing it with a fully privatized system. So do you think that that's possible?
No, I don't think that's where it's heading. I think where it's heading is that obviously under the guise of DEI, they're obviously getting rid of the Department of Education and other things as well to obviously essentially save money. And the reason why they want to save money is so that they can give the people who voted for them a tax cut, essentially. Because obviously what the Department of Education do mostly is obviously provide levels of equity by distributing funds to, schools and programs that need them. But obviously under the guise of DEI, that, we're funding transgender plays in Ireland, because that was another claim that they made, by the way, that they're able to make these cuts and save all of this government money, so they can then hopefully, this is their plan, I think, be able to turn around and say, we've saved all this money, we've got rid of the DEI, and also here is a tax cut, which objectively from their perspective would be a good plan, because I think it would help them get away with what they're doing. And obviously, because Trump's only in for 4 years, the full implications of getting rid of the Department of Education wouldn't be probably fully realized. Obviously, there'll be some immediate damage, but the full impact of it won't be realized for a while. So he might not get the backlash for the damage that will cause. That's my personal opinion. Anyway.
I would agree, but I think the way I see it heading, obviously, I was thinking way far ahead, would there be a fully privatized system? No, I don't think it would be, but I do think what would happen is that we're going to see this, like I said earlier, a growing gap where the quality of education for those who are rich will be readily available, whilst working class and minority students are going to be left behind. So defunding and weakening these public schools will obviously only just increase inequality between rich and poor students. And I'm a huge abolitionist when it comes to private schools anyway. I'm get rid of them. I don't even want them here. But you're then removing federal protections for marginalized groups and allowing government censorship of education. So for me, I'm actually really, really scared for the outcomes there when it comes to vulnerable students or vulnerable communities who are struggling to access a good quality education in the first place anyway. So for me, it's just an even more. Yeah, sorry, Cal, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to ask how did the Democrats and anybody else prevent this then? Obviously, you mentioned earlier, Lewis, there's some sort of challenges already that are going on, and I know that there's been a number of other legal cases on other examples where Trump has signed executive orders that seem to just be a complete and utter complete violation of the Constitution. But what recourse do they have, especially when we've got a Supreme Court that's been stacked with Trump's judges since the last time he was in power? How do they go about preventing this, and can they, or is this just it now? Are we just going to sit back and watch as America just sets itself on fire?
Okay, there's 4 things actually that can happen right now. So the first thing is obviously, according to the Constitution, a bill would have to be passed by the House and the Senate, and then signed by the President to abolish the Department of Education. So that could pass in the House because they have a majority, but in the Senate they do have a majority. But there is this thing, if anybody doesn't know, called the filibuster in the Senate, where actually you need 60 votes out of 100 to pass a piece of legislation. So that is also a safeguard. They're not going to find a single Democrat who wants to abolish the Department of Education. So in theory, if the courts uphold everything and don't allow Trump to do this through any loopholes or reinterpretations of the constitutional power or any of the federal laws, it won't go through Congress. The next thing is that there are 3 special elections coming up. This is a long shot, but because Donald Trump appointed multiple people to his team who are now former Congress people, that there are now 3 special elections coming up. if Democrats win all of those 3 seats over the next 6 months, they will take the House off of Donald Trump and the Republicans. But it is a very big long shot because most of those seats were won with a vote share of over 60% towards Republicans. The first one is in, I think, 60 days, and then the last one is in June. So it's going to take months and months and months to see how this pans out. But if in 60 days, if that first seat is not won by the Democrats, I think it's in Florida, they can't take the majority back because you need all 3 to get the majority. The third thing is, I had 4 things in my head. What was the third one? Obviously, yeah, you've got the judges and you've got the Supreme Court, which obviously can hopefully hold everything up. And the fourth thing that can be done is by making sure people understand the consequences of what is happening and what is funded with these programs. People did get a bit of a shock when Donald Trump tried to do that executive order, which basically literally froze all of federal funding. And immediately, we had literal Trump supporters doing TikToks saying that they've lost their food stamps immediately. Like they've lost this thing called SNAP payments, which is like a benefit that people get, and people saw the shock of what would happen to that. So
what happens if Trump
organizing?
What happens if Trump just refuses to acknowledge any of this, though? Let's say the courts say you can't do that, and it doesn't, and it goes to a vote, and it doesn't get voted for. What happens if Trump just says stuff that Musk comes in, sacks all the employees that work in the department anyway, and and like what we've seen, just essentially closes the department down, even if it's because he's already behaving like a dictator. So what happens then?
So obviously, if the judges basically throw everything down, he can obviously still destroy the department from within. He can continue trying to fire people. They've obviously already offered lots of federal workers a deal where if they resign, they'll get paid for like another 6 or 7 months, and they're trying to do that to save money. Judges have already blocked some of these orders. Some people have already accepted the resignation. That's all kind of up in the air. But essentially, he has the power to slowly dismantle the department from within by essentially ruining it and putting bad staff in there or not replacing staff once they get fired when they start firing them. Now, if obviously if it goes through Congress and it doesn't get through, if they just if they just simply fail to take on Trump, despite the fact that they won't vote for the abolition of the Department of Education, if he continues to ruin it, the only process of stopping him would be to impeach and remove him through the Senate. That's it. A judge cannot order, if the Trump administration do something illegal, like if they literally ordered the closure of the department and then literally physically closed it, there isn't actually a function, as far as I'm aware, where a judge can order a police officer or a team essentially, or any sort of person of authority to prevent that from happening. The only process is then to remove the president through impeachment and removal. So
it's a mess, basically.
I'm feeling stressed. It just stresses me out.
Sorry.
It stresses me out because it feels like we're living in some dystopian reality. Is this actually real? Is this actually happening? Is this man really in office? This tyrannical dictator that's going to exert even more power over the 4 years. Come on, this is so insane. And do you know what's so ironic about all of this? The fact that Trump supporters, or those that believe that they're following Trump and his policies, they are being promised this ideal, this falsified ideal that, it's about less government control. It's about, reinstating your freedoms. And look at what's happening in front of them. Even more government control, even more government censorship. This is the most insane thing ever. Can you not see it? So, yeah.
Another thing which we don't know if they would ever go down this route, is that technically the amount of people in the Supreme Court is not set. So if things do go to the Supreme Court and they get turned down, which, by the way, yes, Trump has got a 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court, but they have actually voted against him multiple times. They have a very specific ideology, and they were put on that bench for that ideology, but they have voted against him multiple times. So if they go against him, he could, in theory, just stack the court and put 10 more justices on there if he wanted to. And technically, there's no process to stop him. The only process to stop him is that the Senate has to approve the judge to a 50 majority vote, and obviously currently it's held by Republicans.
It wasn't like this last time, was it? Or
not like
have
this,
I
no.
just not got a good memory of what happened?
It wasn't like this at all.
This is. I hate to use the unprecedented word, but it's got to be unprecedented. Like, when has this ever happened to this extent in a country like America before? Is there anything historically that we can look back on and say, this is similar to this and this is how it ended up? Or
So some people would argue, again, my history on this period is not great, but when FDR came in, because he had 4 terms and was the last president to do so, because they changed the constitution, because they realized giving a president 4 terms means that they will outlive the Supreme Court and get to completely stack the Supreme Court with all of their choices. And that's what he did, essentially. He had 4 terms and managed to almost replace every single person in the Supreme Court, because the policies that he wanted to bring through, they wouldn't allow in many ways. And then by the time it was time to replace people, he managed to replace the entire court almost, and then he replaced them with people who believed in his version of the Constitution.
But that was like on the way out. That wasn't like within a month of him coming in.
Oh yeah, of course. But yeah, that was over. That was over 4 full terms. But again, my American history on certain parts is patchy. So yes, the word unprecedented for this period is definitely there. But obviously, because they had Project 2025 ready to go, which obviously everyone was warned about and Trump denied, but we all knew it was real and it was there and it was already ready to infiltrate. They're organized. They're organized this time. That's the difference. They weren't organized before.
Yeah.
Can we just touch briefly on? And sorry if I'm derailing your plan for this evening, Lewis. But
derail away.
Well, I just want to sort of discuss the whole sanctions against the the ICC.
Oh no, I have got that on my list. That is coming up very.
Is that on your list? Wonderful, because I want to talk about that, but I'll keep stum until we get there.
But no, let's move on to the next part of the US bit, because I want to talk about, again, specifically Doge and Elon Musk. So I don't know if anybody saw these stories coming out of the last few days, but obviously with Elon Musk's Doge team, he's hired, I think, so far exclusively men. I haven't seen any reports of women being hired, but someone can correct me if I'm being wrong, because he's hired quite a few people. I think most of them are under the age of 26. Most of them have little to no experience, and they're basically just complete and utter Trump sycophants. We've had 2 reports this week. One guy who is 19, and I'm getting 2 stories mixed up. Let's go back, take a step back, take a step back. One of the other guys who is a little bit older, I can't remember his age. Sorry, guys, my iPad died and my notes have gone. I'll put it back on charge. He was found out by the Wall Street Journal to have been posting just a few months ago. This isn't years ago. This isn't like, he posted something awful 10 years ago. This is within the last few months. He was posting eugenicist ideology and racist posts all over his social media, and he deleted them, and they were archived, and he didn't realize that, very smart people at the Wall Street Journal, very good investigative journalists, and they found these posts. So, my things just turned back on. So yeah, some of the things that he said is that he believes in a eugenicist-based immigration system. He said that we need to normalize Indian hate, and he also said that he was racist before it was cool. There's a long list of other things that they found, but that's some of the top highlights there. So what happened is that he resigned, as he should, right? Resign away. Then what happened, as this story gained traction, is that people were saying to Musk that he should be brought back. So Musk went on his lovely social media website, Twitter, now X, and put out a poll asking his followers if he should rehire this guy. Of course, they overwhelmingly voted yes, and then he rehired them. JD Vance got involved, the vice president, as well, before he rehired them, and he said that people should be forgiven for things that they've said in the past, and his life shouldn't be ruined for some social media posts, and also said that this is a quote: journalists shouldn't be rewarding for ruining somebody's life. Sorry, do you understand what the First Amendment means when it comes to the Constitution? When free speech isn't just free speech, the First Amendment specifically talks about a free and open press. The free and open press is just as important as free speech. And again, it's another just absolute affront to the Constitution. And then the other guy, this was the 19-year-old, I believe, he was investigated by another outlet, I can't remember which one, and he was found out to have been fired from his last job for basically leaking company secrets and information. One of the US intelligence agencies had a leaked report as well, I think it was yesterday or the day before, saying that they've basically looked into some of Musk's team and said that they are literally a threat to national security. But nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. But yeah, and he's hired the eugenicist back now as well.
so confused. I am so confused. But also, do you know what really just pisses me off? How the press, I know this is like, we do want the press to have freedom to say what it is they want to say, like you were saying, Lewis, but so I was going to call you Musk for a second, I'm sorry. But sorry, but how the press treats Musk's jokes like some serious financial news. Like as every time Musk tweets about Doge, the news outlets kind of just jump on it immediately and cover it as if it's some breaking financial news. And the media, I think, often fails to distinguish between his jokes, his memes, and actual investment advice. So that's something I need to unpack in a little bit, but this whole thing is problematic. The people that he's hiring are problematic. He is a problematic individual, and I don't know why people are still taking him seriously. I can't also undermine the fact that with Doge, he has really, really impacted working class individuals and people who don't have much knowledge when it comes to investment. He is exploitative in nature, and I think Doge has completely encapsulated that. So, yeah.
Along with that as well, what's obviously more worrying about this, even like Nazi salute aside, because I'm fed up of the argument of was it a Nazi salute? It's just Trump's and Musk's entire. It's just Trump's and Musk's entire history. We don't even need the Nazi salute to say that he believes in white supremacist ideology. He's retweeted plenty of it, and he has facilitated a platform where it is literally thriving now. And obviously, we've got Donald Trump, who pardoned the leader of the Proud Boys, who is a genuine white supremacist, and loads of other instances in the past with Charlottesville. There's good people on both sides. Proud Boys stand back and stand by, and then Trump's entire history, even going all the way back to South Africa, of him reiterating Great Replacement theory and retweeting other white supremacist and sometimes Holocaust denying stuff all over his social media platform. This is incredibly worrying. I don't know if I'm more worried about like that or the reaction to it, because looking at that video of what we just watched of the Congress people trying to get into the Department of Education, it's like, yeah, it's good that they're there and they're being active, but like, what else is happening, guys? Like, where's the uproar? Where's the protest? Like, where are people standing up? It's not happening. Like, what's the expression of like fascism creeps up slowly or something along those lines, and people can kind of ignore it. Like, what's been done? Nothing. Like the uproar has been allowed to happen.
Yeah. And there is, sorry, Cal, did you want to come in, or should
No, go for it.
I just think there are serious legal and ethical questions that expose the deeply entrenched inequalities in the financial system. And I do have to keep asking myself, like, is Musk breaking the law? Because his antics, I feel like, closely resemble that of financial fraud, but there's these legal loopholes that he's able to jump through that allow him to avoid any sort of consequence. There is clear like market manipulation, and maybe people might think that I sleep with a tinfoil hat, but I just have a huge vendetta against this man. But I do think that there is huge market manipulation when it comes to this man. He spreads misleading information to inflate an asset's price, and this whole idea of this pump and dump scheme, like hyping up this asset to the point where it drives up its price, then selling it before its inevitable crash. I feel like that is financial fraud, and then I can't help but see the inequalities that this causes between those who are incredibly working class and expecting a huge increase in their wealth.
Have you read into how his company is going to benefit from this as well, Tesla?
Oh yes.
So for anyone who hasn't seen like the reporting on this is a prediction essentially, but it will probably happen because it makes absolute sense now that Trump has appointed Musk to cut costs. So in America right now, under some previous federal funding that's passed through Congress, you can get a tax credit for buying an electric car, right? So we know the story of Tesla. They did get ahead of the game, and they, put a fire under other companies' asses who were years behind. And Tesla did do well. Now everyone else has caught up to them in terms of like style. Most electric cars absolutely outdo Tesla now. The issue is that a lot of these companies still are catching up with their production, with how many they can make, with the resources that they need, and the demand, and all of these types of things. So Tesla benefited massively from government grants in the past, and also massively benefited from these tax credits. But now Tesla is already in many ways, obviously, it's got a big chunk of that market. The theory is that he's going to basically get Trump to stop the tax credit, which will slow down the growth of all of his competitors who were probably due to overtake him in a few years in terms of sales. So essentially, it's almost like a reverse oligarchy in the sense of like he's not being given a resource that he's going to exploit to make himself richer. He is being given the power to basically suppress any competition without him actually receiving money himself. It's just, in theory, if people keep buying Teslas because they're so available and they have different models and yada, 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 that he will massively benefit from the tax credit being taken away because it will harm other companies. So it's just another aspect of all of this.
Yeah, but I'm seething. I'm just seething because when you see billionaires profit, the working class loses. Like for a billionaire, if you just think about crypto, like a crash in crypto for them is just a bad day, but for the working class investor, that is lost rent, that is debt, that is absolute financial ruin. Like I see him as an exploitative individual who thinks he's beyond any sort of accountability, and he thinks he can get away with things like this. Like it's just, it enrages me.
Well, he is beyond accountability, though.
But why do you think he's beyond accountability? Just because he's got power and money?
But he is beyond accountability. How does anyone hold him to account? He's not elected. You can't you can't vote him out. You can't
Yeah, true. We can't. I mean, but I don't know.
The only process of accountability that's available to Musk is if a committee wants to subpoena him and make him come before them, which they can't do until Democrats control Congress. So
wasn't that attempted the other day?
Somebody wanted to do it, but the Democrats don't have majority power in any committee right now, so they can't do it.
The chairman just immediately shut it down. I was like, nope, we're not doing it, not doing it. It's insane. But it worries me that someone of his influence, for want of a better term, is even allowed to get anywhere near an office of power. You'd think that there would be laws and rules preventing. I mean, Christ, he owns a massive propaganda machine, for God's sake. Why is he even allowed anywhere near government? But I'm not surprised at all that that they're doing this and that they're all set to make an absolute fucking killing from it, because they're not in it for, Musk's not getting involved because he cares about politics and he wants to make the world a better place. Let's be real.
I do want to move on in a moment to the bill, the executive order that Trump signed with him. We've got a video for it. But what I find ironic about this entire situation is that, the right-wing conspiracy theorists, and some lefties as well, but mostly right-wing, for years have said that people like Bill Gates and George Soros are, part of the WEF, and they want to, kill off the population, and they want to harm you through food, and they've got their hands and tentacles in government, and, they're messing with your health. And now we've got the richest man in the world who has got literally his tentacles in 17 different government departments, is not being held accountable, owns a literal social media platform, which he actively uses, and is trying to put chips in people's brains in one of his other companies. He is everything that they conspired about for years and said there was the boogeyman. And it's just a weird type of twisted irony.
But does that not prove the fact that Musk's wealth comes from speculation and not productivity? Everything he does is speculative. Yeah. So, and everyone just feeds into it. And I cannot stand conspiratorial thinking. It's one of the things that triggers me the most. Anyone who sees me on TikTok will know that I can become so riled up that I have to log off. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So yeah.
Callum, can we go to the Trump signing the executive order?
This is that executive order, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is
services worried about them.
This is Trump signing an executive order to ban transgender, I think specifically women, weirdly, not both, but women, from sports in colleges across the
US. If we have to worry about them, we have big problems. Okay, do you want to do this? Watch what I do, and then I'm going to give you some pens, okay? Are you ready? What a nice picture this is, huh, Governor? You ready? We'll do a good job. Wait, let me press that. I want to make this a really good signature, because this is a big one, right? Oh, I think we have a 10. We have a 10.
God bless you, Mr. President.
What's sickening about this, and I talked about this on Normal Island the other night, but just sorry to just jump straight in, but the one thing that really makes me feel physically sick when I watch this is that this is a man who is a known sexual abuser, has numerous allegations of rape and other horrible, appalling forms of abuse against his name, and he's just sat there surrounded by little girls.
So this bill specific. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, just bear in mind this is a guy who talked about dating his own daughter if she was older, who's made inappropriate comments about young children, who's bragged about how he used to get access to the changing rooms at beauty pageants that had underage girls involved with them. And they've just packed him into the Oval Office with all these young girls. It makes me physically sick. That's before we even talk about the context of the executive order and the implications that has.
The hypocrisy.
The executive order specifically stops funding 2 schools that are being funded through the federal government who allow transgender athletes to be transgender athletes, essentially. I want to point out 2 things. So the first thing is that not one of the parents of those children in that room would ever leave their child alone with Donald Trump. Secondly, Donald Trump has more sexual assault allegations against him than there are transgender athletes across the entirety of America in collegiate schools, the ones who are actually doing it professionally. There's about 10 of them. Donald Trump has got 26 accusations of sexual assault.
Yeah.
That's the reality that we're living in. But hey, let's go after transgender people.
It's the wildest thing. This raises critical questions around his hypocrisy, the political weaponization of morality, and this selective enforcement of protection narratives in US politics. Like, for me, this is the most enraging thing. Trump's narrative is that he claims trans women, it's only trans women. Like, notice that. I just think there is misogyny here. I think I'm going to go off on so many tangents, but he claims that trans women in women's spaces are a threat to safety and suggests banning these trans women from sports to protect biological women. And he's framing gender-affirming healthcare for minors, as they call it, as child abuse. So the contradiction here is that Trump himself, like you said, has a long record of credible sexual abuse. Ooh, is it credible? Yeah, credible. Credible sexual abuse allegations, including against underage girls. He was found liable for sexual abuse in that civil case brought by Jean Carroll, and he boasted, like, get this, boasted about the sexual assault in the infamous Access Hollywood tape. This guy cannot be trusted. And what I find so disgusting and abhorrent about this all is the fact, like you said, Callum, all of those young girls around him, and he is there trying to imply that trans women are a threat to biological women. And I genuinely think that the question they need to start asking themselves, people who have this fear-mongering tactic against trans women, is, do you think that misogyny is something that only impacts those with female sex features? If the answer is yes, go do some more reading. And I hate to do this, but Cog hates it. But go Google it. Like, no, but genuinely, like, sit down and get educated people who actually know how to just like navigate these conversations.
100%.
Oh, you go ahead, Callum.
I was just going to say really quickly, something else that I've noticed as well around this is, we don't have to talk about J.K. Rowling. I covered it the other night, but with her, I would sort of expect it. But even people like Sheila Ferguson on LBC, like, I know that she's hardly a savior of trans people. She's absolutely not. But she was praising Trump on her show the other day. She calls herself a feminist, and she's saying how great it is that Trump's brought this thing in because he's now suddenly the protector of women and girls, despite the fact that she dedicates a lot of her time on air to talking about abuse against women. It's the cognitive disconnect between the fact that this is a literal sexual abuser and Cog advised me to say alleged rapist, and people who shout very loudly, claiming to actually care about women's rights, who are celebrating this, putting this guy on a pedestal because of this, because their hatred for trans people has allowed them to forget about the wider connotations of women's rights and of people like Trump. And if you think it is going to stop with trans people, you've got another thing coming. let's not forget that, you know, this is the guy who without whom we wouldn't have seen the overturning of Roe v. Wade, right? Like, it doesn't just stop with trans people.
No.
I want to throw in as well, because I really want to take the conversation head on about trans women in sports, right? So I think people absolutely have a right to be concerned about who is competing, right? And there are very strict rules around this in many organizations, and a lot of organizations still haven't fully figured it out. It is a sensitive and complicated topic, right? But in no reality is, as you know, some outlets and some people and politicians and pundits will do it, that a bloke cannot just put a wig on, say they're a woman, and compete in the Olympics. It is not how it works. Biological women, people who were born women, if they have certain levels of different hormones in their body which are slightly off in any way, they can't compete. There's been multiple stories about this where there are women who may perhaps produce a slightly bit more testosterone than they're supposed to, and when they get tested, they cannot compete.
Well, the turfs and the gender critical lot just turn around and accuse them of being men now, don't they?
Literally. So
That's where it's got now.
At the professional level, in many boards, and there are still some boards out there who are still figuring out their rules and regulations around this, is that everyone has to pass a certain amount of tests, regardless of whether you're transgender or not. And if people fall outside of those rules, they can't compete. And that applies to anyone, whether they're male, female, or transgender. And the thing is, when people are transitioning, especially those who've transitioned from a young age, when it comes to their hormones and their body mass and their muscle, there are people out there who were born a man and transitioned from a young age, and they had puberty blockers, and they've gone through all the treatment, who have similar hormone levels and similar muscle levels and all of this compared to biological women. And it's been proven through a lot of these boards that if you've gone through that process and then you qualify, that you don't actually pose an advantage, because again, multiple transgender people have competed professionally and they lose a lot. Like, they don't come first. Aman Katleef at the Olympics, with the whole controversy about accusing her of being trans when she is not, she lost at the last Olympics badly. She's lost loads of fights before. But another kind of like fault in all of this that I want to point out, if people cared so much about people having biological advantages, let's talk about Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian of all time. He has multiple genetic benefits to do with his wingspan, to do with how long his legs are, to do with how flexible he is. He has like a tendon thing and like a thing related to, what is it, like collagen, I think it is.
Yeah,
so he
doesn't produce the same amount of lactic acid as a normal
person.
Oh yeah, either.
Which is very, very important in sports. And this is the problem, right? Like, these things aren't tested for and don't exclude people when it comes to professional sports. And Michael Phelps, I'm sure he has worked extremely hard and trained very hard all his life. I used to go to college with a guy who tried to get into the Olympics, and he was waking up every morning at 3 a.m. 7 days a week to train, right? These people work hard. I don't want to take that away from Michael Phelps, but he does have a biological advantage. So if we really want to get down to nitty-gritty,
the whole point of the Olympics and elite sport is to celebrate people who have biological advantages, right? Because your average person on the street is never going to be an Olympic athlete, because they, no matter, don't get me wrong, you can train, but I don't believe anyone can be an Olympic athlete. You have to. It's more than just training. We are talking about the absolute elite. We are talking about people whose bodies just work in a way that is superhuman compared to everybody else.
Yeah, look at Simone Biles. She is a woman who has worked extremely hard, right? You can't just walk into that role, but her size and her specific stature does benefit her, and that is an advantage. But obviously, you have to add the hard work to it to make it work, right? There are lots of examples out there of it. So if we really want to start getting nitty gritty, we can start testing people's genes. Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Can I just say something really quickly? Because what I find is that there is always this hyper focus on women's sports, women, and what I think is shaping the narrative here is misogynoir. When I think of the treatment of Caster Semenya, the way that misogynoir operated in that instance, that intersection between racism and sexism, meant that Semenya was not just targeted for being a woman of naturally high testosterone, but specifically for being a Black African woman whose body challenged white Eurocentric standards of femininity. Now, what I think that people are really, really afraid of, for no odd reason other than the fact that it's just propaganda, is this whole idea of, like you said, advantages. And I think what we need to actually interrogate is the fact that advantages in sport are not necessarily unfair fair. Like, for example, if we were to think about fencing, not that that's an interesting sport maybe to some, but left-handed athletes have advantages over right-handed athletes in many sports, and it is perhaps most marked in fencing, where 40% of elite fencers are left-handed versus 10% of the population is left-handed. But right-handed fencers and left-handed fencers can engage in a meaningful competition despite those advantages that left-handed fencers have. So better questions that people could be asking is, can trans women and women engage with each other in meaningful competition in sport? And I think the answer is yes, like, because we see those losses and those wins on both sides. So, but yeah, just to go back to what I was saying about misogynoir, when I look at the way that they treated Man Khalif, the stereotypes of what it means to be feminine, the muscular
Let's not
build,
forget about Michelle Obama as well.
Michelle Obama.
Many people on the right for years still say that she is a transgender woman, and it's just
Yeah.
disgusting.
It is
Because
disgusting.
it's masculinizing black women as well,
Exactly what I was
which
going to
is
say.
what they often do.
I agree, and there is, I think, gender policing as well when it comes to people in sport. This whole idea of proving one's womanhood through invasive sex testing, and something that rarely happens, I think, to white women athletes, even those with biological advantages, to be honest. So I think that's something that needs to be interrogated. And whenever I've sat in conversations, when people are trying to have conversations about trans women in sport, it's always a case of, but they don't look like a woman. They don't look like a woman. It's always this like, subjective view of what womanhood looks like, and that's what's really grating against me. It's just really grating on me.
It's insane, and these are the same people that like to argue and say that that people that support trans rights are reducing what it means to be a woman down to stereotypes. Yet, they're the first ones to call out, well, if you're a woman and you've got a high level of testosterone, some muscles, short hair, and you compete in sports, you must be a man. I want to just draw attention quickly to Natalie's comment, who said, my tests show my testosterone is less than a cis woman, and I am able by Olympics, I think that's by Olympic standards, to compete in martial arts tournaments against cis women. But because of rulings made, I have to fight men. And then she goes on to say that ruling broke 2 of my ribs and gave me a fractured wrist in my first bout. And that's the other thing; it puts people in danger doing this.
Yeah.
Something else that struck me was that obviously the Olympics are due to be held in LA, the next Olympics, and Trump's already made it very clear that he intends to block any visas to any trans athletes that apply to attend the Olympics. So I assume that applies to trans men that are competing as well. But it'll be interesting
That
to
puts the
see.
athletes in a really difficult position as well,
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
because athletes have been pressured to do boycotts in the past, and like I understand boycotts and I think they're very practical, but it's really hard to ask an athlete to boycott something that they've been training for since they were 12, and they only get to do it once every 4 years. It's a really hard situation to be in.
Yeah, and not to bring this back to Trump, sorry, but there is this broader pattern of right-wing hypocrisy when it comes to sexual misconduct. I find that a lot of conservatives or people on the right side of the political spectrum, and I know that people on the left are guilty of this too, but I think predominantly on the right, where there is this focus on imagined threats whilst ignoring the real predators that are actually within their own ranks. I think they're wanting to shadow box potential harm by focusing on things that aren't truly a priority. If anything, I think the questions you should be asking is, why are powerful men shielded when doing things of this nature, whilst marginalized groups are punished?
Well, we saw this in the last Olympics, didn't we? Where you had everybody was kicking off about Aman Khalif, but in the same breath, we had an Olympic athlete who had literally been convicted of rape, who was taking part. And don't get me
It was
wrong,
paedophilia, not rape, or was it both?
sorry, sorry. I think
was it a French Olympian? I think it was.
Yeah. Apologies. Yeah, and he. And
I might be wrong. I can't remember.
There was some outrage about that, but it wasn't shouted about anywhere near as much. And the people who were shouting the loudest, who claimed to care the most about the rights of women and girls, was certainly shouting louder about whether or not Aman Khalif is a man than they were about the literal predator that was taking part in the Olympics.
Quite literally. And sorry,
but now they're doing the same with Trump, because they're making excuses for him.
They are, and I'm so sorry I keep coming back to this, but this whole idea of women, particularly only women needing to prove their womanhood, like, it has a colonial history on policing bodies of women who come from marginalized communities, come from minoritized communities. This happened during European colonial rule. This is something where Black women are seen as these too masculine, hypersexualized individuals, and Black women in sports are disproportionately targeted for gender scrutiny. And I do think there is a fair degree of eugenics that comes in sex testing. The sex verification in sports literally began during the Cold War, when female athletes were subjected to humiliating medical inspections. And this is happening again. Even in the 1980s and 1990s, there was an increased focus on the fact that testosterone was the defining factor of womanhood, ignoring the fact that many women naturally produce different levels of hormones. And when we get older, look at the beards we grow because our testosterone levels go up. So I just find it so insane. There is a eugenicist lens being used on sex testing that I think needs to be interrogated. And I think people need to have more conversations about Black women's experiences and women of colour in sport and how they're being treated. The misogyny is very, very real, and I don't think enough people are speaking on it.
I do have to move this on because I've got two more stories that I want to cover. No,
we're speaking so much, guys. Bloody hell.
No apologies needed, but I want to try and cover. There was three more things I wanted to talk about. The Labour whips. I'm gonna move that story out because we did talk about it earlier this week. I want to move on to the Lammy clip, Callum, if we can quickly get that up. And he's talking about Sudan, and the topic isn't Sudan, but I'll explain after we watch the clip.
Border just behind me. Its people are suffering the biggest humanitarian catastrophe on the planet.
I just sat with a woman who showed me the burn marks. She had been burnt by soldiers. She had been beaten and she had been raped.
Where is the liberal outrage? We cannot have a hierarchy of conflict with this conflict at the bottom. When I came into office, I was determined that Britain would not look the other way. In November, we won support from all but Russia on a resolution for peace in Sudan at the UN Security Council.
Let me be clear, the UK will not forget Sudan.
Back at the end of last year, I doubled aid to 200.
So the reason why I brought this up is at some point, I hope we can have more time to talk about what is happening in Sudan because it is a tragedy there. But I'm trying to bring this into a wider conversation. David Lammy is a fucking hypocrite. Asking people where the liberal outrage is, when I watch this, really, really pissed me off. Because, if we start just for 1 second with China, in 2021, David Lammy and the Labour Party got up in Parliament and was saying that what is happening to the Uyghurs in China is a genocide. They are accused of sterilising Uyghurs, putting them in camps, which meets the definition of genocide, because genocide isn't just about killing people, it's about ending populations through restricting abilities to give birth and sterilization. That is technically genocide. So they voted in Parliament for this motion that the Chinese government is committing a genocide. They did that with their full chest. David Lammy wrote an article about it and said that if he gets into power, he's going to do something about it. Fast forward, they get into power. Within months, he's in China shaking hands, making deals. And when being asked about his position on that, he's just basically completely either shied away from it or tried to move on from it. So that's the first level of hypocrisy here. The second one is obviously Gaza, right? Within, I think it was the first week or so, or a week or two, he went over to Israel, was shaking Benjamin Netanyahu's hand. Oh, we want a two-state solution, please, yada, yada, yada. Took them absolutely months to ban 30 out of about 350 arms sales that were going to Israel due to them potentially violating human rights in their opinion. And then we found out weeks and weeks later that when they got dragged to court by a human rights group, that actually they allowed 5 more arms sales to continue going ahead, even though they knew it could be breaching humanitarian laws and being used to commit war crimes. But they were scared that they would upset the US because of how it could affect NATO, which was their argument. We've got the arrest warrants out against these 2 people. We've obviously got the ICJ rulings. And obviously now we've got the literal ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And the reason I wanted to bring up that video of Lammy is not only is a hypocrite, but all these actions of Lammy and our government and the Western governments, and obviously some of them have been fighting against Israel and fighting against the US, they're the ones who broke down this order And that's why Sudan isn't getting the attention that it deserves, and other things in the world aren't getting the attention that it deserves, because people are exhausted. People put so much effort and so much power and so much time into Gaza, and we've had some successes, like the arrest warrants and stuff like that, and Israel's diplomatic power and influence has waned, but ultimately we're heading towards actual ethnic cleansing, right? David Lammy is a part of that. It's his fault, partly. It's our government's fault, partly. So when he's getting up asking where the liberal outrage is, what's the fucking point? And I'm not saying give up. I'm not saying that. But if he's going to sit there and say what's happening is a genocide, we need more attention on this, at the same time doing nothing about these other things, what is the fucking point? And that's why I wanted to bring up this clip. And
But
what's your guys' thoughts?
When the liberal outrage, as he puts it, exists, though, he sits on his arse and does fuck all about it.
Yeah.
So, like, I totally get what you mean when you're saying when you say what's the point? Like, of course we should care about these atrocities and human rights violations and the likes, and as they're happening. But this idea that Lammy is somehow, somehow the moral arbiter in all of this, when he has literally changed his tune on multiple examples of human rights violations from before he was in power to now, simply because now he's the foreign secretary, he's got to be diplomatic, hasn't he? Even in the face of literal genocide and literal human rights violations, and now talks of ethnic cleansing, not just from Israel but also from the US. We don't agree with that. We don't support the forced removal of Palestinians from Gaza, but they're not calling it ethnic cleansing, which is what it is, because they're too frightened to. Because heaven forbid that we upset little Trump, or poor Benjamin Netanyahu. Heaven forbid we hurt their little feelings by calling out the literal criminal acts that they're carrying out. It gets me wound up.
Just on this comment as well that Young's put as well. So, a reminder that Lammy and Starmer incorrectly define genocide as they mark it by numbers, which is not a condition of genocide. And that is absolutely correct. Lammy got up in Parliament and said, basically, not enough people have died. And genocide is a very strong word. And, we think of things like the Holocaust and stuff like that. No, are you forgetting about the Bosnian genocide? 8,000 people. That was a genocide. That was legally defined in the courts and prosecuted and found guilty of literal genocide. 8,000, which obviously is still too many people, but the idea that numbers come into it is absolutely not true. And as I mentioned with China, is that sterilization of a group of people. You can commit genocide without killing a single person.
Yeah.
Also, that liberal outrage comment. Sorry, Sarah, just quickly. That liberal outrage comment. It feels a bit loaded. That, doesn't it? It feels a little bit judgmental, as if he's saying, that people marching to not, to want to see the end of a genocide being committed in Gaza is, can be reduced to liberal outrage. Like, what's that about? Maybe it's just me, but it definitely comes across that way. I don't know what you think, but
David Lammy, I can't stand him, to be honest. I think he presents himself as a global humanitarian for the people, blah, blah, blah. But he has successfully ignored Sudan's genocide. His selective outrage, I think, just reveals a Western political bias towards conflicts that serve elite interests. And that's what he's proving to do. I mean, I won't forget, obviously, the war that broke out in Sudan. He did speak out about the Darfur genocide, and he condemned Sudan's then leader, Omar al-Bashir. But he now bestowed a silence on Sudan's current genocide, despite the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, committing ethnic cleansing in Darfur. There's been no strong calls for intervention, sanctions, or accountability on his part, unlike his vocal stance on Ukraine, or I think questionably Israel-Palestine, although it wasn't good enough. And he had the audacity to criticise Western hypocrisy on human rights and the liberal outrage, but yet he himself fails to adjust a double standard when it comes to Sudan. So when he released this video, I looked at him and I said, who are you? You fake guy. Like, please get off my screen. I can't stand you trying to weaponize the atrocities that are happening in Sudan as a means to make you seem, as a humanitarian. Like, do one.
I want to shift some
Sorry.
blame. What was that? What's the comment? Lemmy is just exploiting it for his and the UK government's
Yeah,
political advantage.
exactly.
Yeah. Because it was the US who officially declared it a genocide, by the way, which again they've got no credibility to do so. Like, obviously, what is going on there is what they say it is, but at the same time, the US declaring a genocide is just it's the most ironic, ridiculous thing ever.
It shows that they are able to when they want to, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the other part that I want to touch on this as well is that, let's play slight devil's advocate, and it's hard to say when we're talking about things like genocide, but we know part of the reason why the West and countries like the UK are basically not doing as much as they should be is because of US imperialism, right? They have strategically over the last century embedded, military bases. It's essentially a global police state, military bases, multiple ones in many NATO countries all across the world, and obviously slowly our military is degraded, so we rely on their military security that they provide us, but essentially we're held hostage to obviously what they want us to do and push us and put us and tell us to do certain things. And again, I'm not just trying to blame the US, but when it comes to things like trade, right, we've seen how Trump can weaponize his trade relationships because they are the big power with people like Canada and Mexico, despite the fact that he didn't really get anything from those countries. He could, if he wanted to, go further. We've got things like that's what's going on with Greenland and Panama and all these types of issues. I get that Starmer and the Labour government and past governments are stuck sometimes between a rock and a hard place, because to stand up to the US would mean a massive amount of harm to the UK. But at the same time, there are so many more things that we could be doing. And what's kind of more interesting with this topic is that with the damage that Trump is doing by pulling out of US aid, by ruining relationships, he's obviously weakening America, which then people will argue it will only strengthen people like China and increase their influence, because when they pull aid out of South Africa and affect 8.5 million people getting the HIV medication, China could step up and be like, well, we'll give you that money, right? And then this is how spheres of influence work. Somebody commented earlier saying, it's essentially the US aid is basically how the US helps keep its power by saying, you give us some resources, you let us build a military base here, we're going to give you some aid. It's how they keep influence. So what side do we want to be on, guys? Do we want to be on the genocidal US, or do we want to be under the sphere of influence of genocidal China? And these are the difficult positions that people get put in. That if we stop supporting the US, then China increases. Anyway, do you kind of get the point that I'm making here? Like, what can people do? And this is not me trying to excuse the actions of us supporting Israel, because we can still stop all arms sales. We could stop trade. We could put sanctions on people. There are definitely we could take, but how do we unwrap ourselves from a genocidal government who we also rely on at the same time is kind of the difficult question that I want to ask. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Cal, do you want to take it first?
Is that because you're as stuck for words as I am?
That's a really good question, though. It was such a good question.
It is a good question. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how we do that, but I feel like we have to do something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a start would simply just be calling a spade,
exactly.
Right? Like, regardless of who it is, regardless of whether it's a political ally, regardless of whether it's someone that we've got a trade deal with or someone that we send money to or that we take money from, like, let's be real, the all this talk about, special relationships with the US and whatever. If you two were behaving even, a tenth of the way that some of these countries are, as your friend, I would be calling you out for your bullshit. And I would quite happily do it publicly if you were making your comments publicly too, And I know that you would do the same for me, because it's what friends do. We call each other out when we do shit that we shouldn't be doing,
Yeah.
And for some reason we can't even do that. Like, the government won't even do that. They're scared to call ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
And I just again, I can't shake this bloody liberal outrage comment. And I don't know what Lammy wants from people, right? We go out and we protest when we see atrocities happening and they ignore us. If we don't protest, it's where's the liberal outrage? Why aren't you angry about these? But yeah, to try and answer your question, Lewis, I don't know is the honest answer. I don't know what can be done, but I feel like there needs to be something.
I think there are a few things we can do. I think first things first, and I do this when it comes to any sort of topic, but just acknowledge our role in the system. I think there is passive complicity that happens in a lot of the countries that we live in, particularly in the global north. I hate regarding us as the West. It makes it seem as though we're in some ridiculous hierarchy, but I think there's passive complicity, and many of us live in countries like us in the UK whose governments literally do fund, arm, or diplomatically shield genocidal regimes. I think what we can also do collectively is challenge media and political narratives. I think there are genocide hierarchies where some atrocities receive amazing and great attention, massive attention. Ukraine got a lot of attention, whilst others, Sudan, Congo, Neymar, are erased.
Well, if you look at Rachel's comment as well, she's made a very good point. 150,000 Armenians were ethnically cleansed. I'm really sorry, Rachel, I don't want to butcher the name, but Artsakh 2 years ago, and Western leaders were quiet since they needed Azerbaijani oil and gas. And again, these are the things that continue to happen. There are so many atrocities in the world that continue to happen, and we do turn blind eyes to, or we don't intervene in. I often remember that when it came to South African apartheid as well, we were the last country, along with America, to finally, be like, "Oh, you're doing something wrong," and that seems to be the continued story.
Yeah, and
it's that thing though of not wanting to turn the school bully onto you, isn't it? And obviously that famous poem comes to mind as well. First the game for the trade unionists, but it is a sense of that where it's like, well, actually, if we just sit by quietly while these people are committing genocide and doing terrible things, like we won't talk about it because we don't want to upset them. We don't want them to turn on us, And if they turn on us, then we'll be in trouble. But it just then makes you complicit because you're sat watching, like using the school bully analogy, you're literally sat watching this bully, go and beat the shit out of all your classmates. And you're sat there going, well, if I don't say anything, I'll be okay.
I think.
Sorry, Liz. There's just one thing because it does ties in quite nicely with was it Rachel's comment? Yeah, Rachel's comment that I think we need to start collectively ending the racial bias that comes in genocide responses. I do think there's been a common trend where Black and brown lives are devalued. African and Middle Eastern conflicts receive less action than European ones, and there is a huge double standard when it comes to refugee responses too. This whole Western moral authority, I think, is an absolute farce. It's about
that ties into the ICC as well. So we early this week, Donald Trump obviously sanctioned the ICC. People forget that he actually did this last time too. So those sanctions stop them from traveling, freezes any assets that they have under American influence, aka if they have a bank account in America, it's now frozen. If they have assets in America, they can't access them. And this is in response to, obviously, the ICC arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. By the way, I do want to very quickly add that Yoav Gallant did an interview just over a day ago. I posted a video about this earlier, admitting that they, in fact, did use the Hannibal Directive on October 7th. And the Hannibal Directive is a military order which allows the military to essentially kill soldiers. That's the original meaning of it, to kill soldiers who are being taken hostage by militants, meaning like if they're taken hostage and they're in a car and they're being driven away by the person who's taking them hostage, you can blow up that car essentially because it's more important to not let them have a hostage. What happened on October 7th, according to multiple investigations from Israeli and Western media, is that because it was so disorganized, because it was such a mess, that the orders were given out. One order that went out was not a single car can enter Gaza, and it seems like from the investigations that the military just went ham, and obviously vehicles got blown up, houses got blown up with multiple civilians inside. We still don't know essentially how many civilians were actually killed by the IDF as opposed to Hamas, and maybe soon we'll find out. Sorry, that was a slight tangent.
Just to be clear on that point though, Lewis, what Yoav Gallant is essentially admitting to is what many said at the time, which is that a number, and like you say, we might eventually find out, but a number of the deaths that day were at the hands of Israel and the IDF, not Hamas, which is what people said at the time and were accused of anti-Semitism for saying.
Correct. But on the ICC side of things, obviously, so the sanctions have gone ahead. the ICC is interesting, right? We have that famous clip from Lindsey Graham, the senator from Kentucky, I think. No, that's Mitch McConnell. North Carolina or something. Anyway, we all know lovely little Lindsey Graham, who, no, I'm not going to make the comment. If people know what comment I was about to make, you can guess. He said that the system wasn't set up to prosecute people like us, meaning white people. That's what he meant when he said that comment. He said that comment months ago when the arrest warrants first came out, because traditionally the ICC has only gone after basically leaders from the global south, mostly African leaders and militants. Obviously, Vladimir Putin was the first white-looking person to have a arrest warrant put out for him. But obviously, they all agreed with that one. But the second, obviously, one goes out to a person within, Western or the global North's sphere of power. That's it. That's unacceptable. We're going to sanction you. I also, again, want to point out, we covered this months ago, that Israel was in fact spying, hacking and threatening members of the ICC, including the prosecutor, turning up to her home and threatening her with transcripts from her husband and phone calls and loads of stuff like that. And that's all on record and proven by multiple investigative journalists who've done a fantastic job.
Do you think the sanctioning of the ICC from Trump's administration is partly to try and deter them from ever investigating or looking to any future behaviour that Trump may or may not be planning on?
So it does two things, essentially. Obviously, it does harm them by obviously blocking them from traveling to certain places and freezing any assets that they may have, and impedes their investigations, essentially. But also the second thing that it does is that it through Trump's declaration that they are anti-Semitic and unfair and treating Israel unfairly, he gets to declare that to his followers, and then they just simply believe that, and that, which then obviously undermines the ICC and further undermines the international order. But on top of that as well, by sanctioning the ICC, what they have done is also impeded other investigations as well. So there's multiple investigations that the court are doing all across the world, including Sudan and other places where atrocities are happening, and those sanctions are now going to affect those investigations and affect those people and those victims.
And just going off of that, I think the sanctions are not. I think what it shows is that it's clearly not about justice. It's a geopolitical weapon that's used to serve Western interests, even at the cost of civilian suffering. All I see when these sanctions are put in place, that it's hurting civilians more than it's hurting the leaders. Economic sanctions will often devastate ordinary people, causing these food shortages, medical crises, and economic collapse as a result. And then, for example, let's look at Iraq in the 1990s. UN sanctions led to deaths of 500,000 children due to medicine and food shortages. So we're seeing these sanctions just impact ordinary people on a day-to-day basis. So it is a geopolitical weapon. I don't see it as anything else.
But it also plants that seed, doesn't it, for when, when down the line, bear in mind Trump's talking about putting, tens of thousands of people into Guantanamo Bay, despite the fact that it's designed at maximum capacity to house about 800.
We got satellite photos today, by the way, of them building infrastructure for it already, unfortunately.
So, but inevitably, when that happens, I would imagine that there's always a potential that, depending on what Trump's next move is, that he himself could find himself under investigation by the ICC. And if that were to occur, then it's great for him because he's sanctioned them. If the ICC turn around and if in a year or two's down the line we find out that he's been committing appalling atrocities against some of these so-called illegal immigrants that he wants to house in Guantanamo Bay, and there is an investigation, he can turn around and he can say, well, they're just doing it because I sanctioned them. It's just, they're just playing politics with the law, like what the Democrats did when they tried to get me put in prison last time, and his supporters and his followers will lap that up.
Yeah.
And also another aspect with all of this is just the general breakdown of the international order. I know the international order constantly fails, right? But we're in a place where Israel and the US just pulled out the UN Human Rights Council. Obviously, we've got this ICC sanctioned, but on top of that as well, the only response that we've had from this, really, some countries' statements have been more severe than others, but just no pushback. Essentially, it's just a case of, we disagree with what Trump's saying. We believe in a two-state solution, and that's it. So they're going to go ahead and ethnically cleanse them. None of those actions are going to stop America from doing what they want to do.
Exactly. Both the ICC and sanctions, I think, just reinforce Western dominance in global affairs, and I think selective accountability is only going to strengthen Western power. So if they're not being, so I don't know.
I do, because we've only got a few minutes left. We're running a little bit over, but I do really want to touch on this quick story. Something more domestic. We can step away from the big stories, but this week there's some changes to domestic abuse laws, and I think I want to talk about these things a little bit more and try and squeeze them in a little bit more often, because it's kind of easy to talk about the more hot topics, and I feel like a lot of topics don't always get covered. So coercive control is to be put on par with other types of domestic abuse in England and Wales. Police and probation services will be legally required to share with one another information that suggests offenders are at risk to others. Coercive control is to be put on par with other forms of domestic abuse, and all the enforcement agencies are going to be able to work together to tackle it. So starting from this Monday, just gone, offenders who are serving a sentence of at least 12 months for controlling or coercive behaviour will be automatically managed under multi-agency public protection arrangements. This means the police, the probation service, and other agencies will legally be required to share with one another information about offenders that suggests they are at risk to others, such as their former partners and members of public. So obviously, part of the reason why I wanted to bring this up, because I think it's a positive change. This was originally put in by the Tories, but then signed in by Labour, so a little bit of working together, which is good. But we talk about protecting women and children and protecting people in society usually through the lens of hot topics or big things that are happening. But I'm glad that we can obviously get some space on these types of topics, because right now we're literally in a crisis when it comes to abuse against women and children in this country, and that's been declared by which organisation again, Sarah?
The National Police Chiefs Council, the NPCC.
Thank you very much. And we need to pay more attention to these topics without the lens of a hot topic, essentially. What do you think of these changes? Do you think obviously it's a good change? Do you think what could be done, and are you happy? Do you think this is going to be effective?
I'd like to see. Sorry, Sarah.
No, you go. No, you go.
I was just going to say I'd like to see them make misogyny a hate crime as well, because that's been something that they've discussed, multiple times, and have, for many reasons and many occasions, decided not to do. And I don't understand that, apart from the fact that a lot of the people in Parliament who would have to pass that would probably find themselves facing some form of prosecution for hate crimes, because the misogynists. But yeah, I mean, it's a step in the right direction, isn't it? It is about time. I think there is still a lot to be done, particularly around as well. I mean, it's great that coercive control is going to be sort of looked at in this light, but you've also got issues with things like stalking, for example, and issues around that still haven't been addressed and haven't been dealt with the way in that's investigated by police, and more specifically, what help is available to victims of it to actually get support and to prevent that from happening. But yes, it's certainly a step in the right direction, and hopefully the government will continue to introduce more policies like this. But go on, Sarah.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Lewis. I think it's a good step in the right direction. My only concern is that it looks great on paper. What's it going to look like in practice? Because there are still enforcement gaps and police failures that continue to happen. Inconsistent policing, because we have seen the police, and I think the law and just the things that are put into legislation have a poor track record of enforcing coercive control laws, or just laws around that. Many survivors do report that the officers dismiss psychological abuse unless physical violence is involved, or there are low conviction rates despite coercive control being criminalised since 2015. So prosecutions remain rare, and when cases do reach court, conviction rates are still low. So I do think that laws are meaningless without proper enforcement. And I still do think that in the judiciary system, we have not mandated accountability when it comes to holding perpetrators to account. There are still many legal hurdles for victims, and I think that there is from the line of work that I've been in, perpetrators do weaponize the system. So abusers often will use family courts or counterclaims and defamation lawsuits to discredit victims. So I think there is still very much a huge emphasis or a burden on survivors to prove abuse beyond doubt, and therefore allowing perpetrators to manipulate the system to their advantage. So yeah, I think that there's still a lot to do. Underfunded domestic abuse services need to be funded more. We need to start mandating accountability a little bit more. So looks great on paper. I want to see action happen.
I've just had a really quick look. According to the ONS, as of the year ending March 2024, there are 45,310 recorded offences of coercive control by police in England and Wales. So this is, a huge problem that needs to be addressed. But we need to address it from within the police force as well, because the number of, I've not got the stats to hand, but I mean, the number of just Met police officers that were under investigation or suspended following what happened with Sarah Everard, and when they started looking into it, the number of police officers that had domestic violence and domestic abuse allegations against them, and these were people that were working in the police force, so that whole thing needs sort of attacking straight on as well.
I'm glad obviously changes are happening, but they're small changes. I have a friend who used Clare's Law, which I think is very useful. That's the one where you can go to the police and ask them for information relating to somebody that you're either seeing or a partner that you have. It doesn't matter how long you've been with them or how little of time that you've been spending with them. You can ask if this person poses a danger to me by the police using their discretion to tell you about anything that they have on their record about that person. I have a friend who used that. All I can say is that it was extremely revealing about that person's past, and my friend was able to use that as a tool to avoid future things happening. However, I think personally what I'd like to see, and I know they have these systems in America, I haven't really looked too much into the argument for or against them, but I think they are practical, is that if we're going to use multi-agency powers to work together to try and prevent abusers being abusers more in the future, that I think if somebody goes to prison for domestic violence specifically, is that in America, if you go to prison for, depending on what state you're in, like if you're a literal pedophile, if you move to a neighborhood, the neighborhood gets notified. Like they get that information. And I know obviously there's a risk of danger to the individual who's committed that crime, but for me, I think that outweighs the potential future victims, and it's only for a period of time. So I'm essentially proposing the idea that if somebody does go to prison for domestic violence, that they be legally required to tell any partners within a specific period of time. I wouldn't say it should be for the rest of their lives, but maybe for 5 years, 10 years after you have been released from prison, you're legally required to inform the police if you are seeing anyone, and if you're caught, you're immediately recalled back to prison. Perhaps that's an idiot, I don't know, but I know other countries do have systems in place like that.
I mean, I suppose it's similar to, not quite the same, but obviously, if you're a sex offender, you've got the sex offenders register, right? Which you then on. So having some form of register, because to my knowledge, something like that doesn't exist currently for domestic abuse. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. So that might be a way forward. I do think we need to be careful though with things like that, because it would obviously have to be in the case of when after somebody had actually been prosecuted and charged and gone to prison, rather than,
of course,
you've got Claire law that can be applied for people who obviously haven't even necessarily been convicted. When you use Clare's Law, you can find out if someone's made a report to the police about somebody's just simple behavior. Clare's Law, the police can use that to inform you that this person hasn't gone to prison or anything or was arrested for this, but somebody did report that they thought they were getting stalked by this person. So Clare's Law is really good like that. I would love to maybe see a more proactive type of Clare's Law somehow. Maybe I don't know what that would look like and how it would work, but it'd be good if it'd be more proactive, because people don't expect abuse until they see it. Most people who might use something like Clare's Law, I'm just assuming, are people who have been probably victims in the past, so they're more cautious. I think most people don't go into relationships naively, but most people probably go into a relationship not knowing that they could be up for potential abuse in the future, because people don't think like that when they go into relationships unless you've had something similar happen to you or someone close to you in the past.
And I think this is a call not just to the laws that I think are proving to be a little bit symbolic. I think without proper enforcement, victim support and systemic change, these laws are just symbolic. So I think what we need to be looking into is more funding into survivor services, more funding into social services, and not just criminal punishment, although great. But I do think we need to put more support in place for those who are facing abuse, and particularly those that come from minoritized communities, those who are part of Black and brown communities, those who are part of LGBTQ plus communities, because they do struggle to even report things to the police in the first place. So and also I think removing those inequalities that exist in those sorts of systems. But are we ending the show, Lewis? Because I wanted to
do you want to bring anything else up? Of course.
Just something really quickly, just on the topic of abuse, because I think this is such a great opportunity to signpost people to services if they know of someone or they themselves are experiencing abuse. That there are so many great things out there. Southall Black Sisters in London. You've got Women's Aid, obviously. You can look at local Women's Aid charities within your own local area. Mankind for Men, Gallup for the LGBTQ community, Sarah's Law, Claire's Law, and Valerie's Law are all laws that can be accessed by men and women. So make sure that you look into those if it's necessary. But yeah, I think an opportunity to signpost. We all have a responsibility to safeguard each other. So let's just start doing that a little bit more when it comes to not just these symbolic laws, but protecting each other.
And also just educate yourself on how victims suffer through these situations. There's sometimes often a lot of victim blaming. There are situations often where people do get abused in different ways, whether it's physical or through coercive behavior, and they stay with that person repeatedly. There's a lot of psychology that goes into that, and in people within those circumstances. Obviously, regardless if someone is just simply financially tied to somebody and or provides them with money, or they have a family or a house and all these types of things together, even without those factors, people have psychological not issues, that's not the word I'm looking for, but people can be put in situations where despite that abuse that they get, they still want to stay with that person, and that's not that person's fault. So it's really important to never victim blame in these situations, and there's a lot of good reading and also a lot of podcasts as well about this topic that I we recommend people go and search out and try and educate yourself on how victims are as well, because we need to stop blaming them.
Agreed.
I would normally try and finish on a light note, but I think we can just simply end it there. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on right now, guys. There's a lot of stuff going on in the news. Obviously, don't overwhelm yourselves by everything that is happening. It is very scary out there right now. Obviously, we can just keep trying to keep ourselves informed, organize when we can, organize with purpose, and making sure that your friends are organized too, your family members, even if they say Nigel Farage isn't too bad. Which obviously we would immediately
speaking from personal experience there.
No, my family haven't quite gone there yet, though. Not yet. But we'll see. But we will see you next time on Monday's show. I can't remember who's hosting. Panic, Callum, who's hosting on Monday?
Panic, Sarah, who's hosting on Monday?
I don't know. I know that I'm guesting, so whoever it is, I can't wait.
Well, somebody's going to be there. If it's me, I'm literally checking right now. If it's me, you guys can all laugh at me.
It's not me. I'm
It's loading
producing though, so I'll be there. Me and Sarah will be there, but
we'll be there. Yeah, I'll be guesting.
This Monday it says Cog Callum producing, Sarah guesting. So it's Cog.
It's Cog.
There we go. We're very professional, guys.
That'd be nice. I feel like we've not seen Cog for a while, actually. It'd be nice to have him on.
Thank you, Callum and Sarah. It's been an interesting show. Obviously, we will try and keep everybody informed as we can and have great discussions. So thank you for joining us. We will see you on Monday.
Oh, I should be ending the stream, shouldn't I?
Yeah, you should. Yes.
I'm sat there just smiling like, see you Monday.